Every man who ever marched off to war had two fears, not one. The first was dying. You know all about that one. The battles, the medals, the letters home that got read out at funerals. But the second fear, nobody ever carved that one into a monument. The second fear was coming home with something he could never explain to his mother, his wife, or his priest. So let me ask you something, and really sit with it for a second. When a soldier in 1500 or 1700 or even 1917 slipped off into a town at night and met someone, what on earth did he think was going to keep him safe? You and I have an answer to that question. They mostly did not. Pull up a chair. This one is a story. It was 1495, and a French king named Charles VIII had marched an enormous army down into Italy to lay claim to the city of Naples. Picture it. Tens of thousands of men, French, Spanish, German, Swiss mercenaries, all crammed together outside the city walls, far from home, bored, frightened, and very much alive. And where you get armies, you get camp followers, and you get the local women of Naples, and you get the oldest arrangement in human history. Then something started happening to these men that nobody had a name for yet. Sores, fevers, rashes that crawled across the whole body, and in the worst cases, the flesh itself beginning to rot, faces caving in, men dying in agony months later. The doctors of Naples had never seen anything like it, because, by most accounts, Europe never had. When Charles gave up and his army melted away, those soldiers carried the thing home with them in every direction at once. Within 5 years it had reached France, Germany, Switzerland, England, and beyond. And here is the part that tells you everything about people. Nobody wanted to own it. The Italians called it the French disease. The French called it the disease of Naples. The Russians called it the Polish disease. The Polish called it the German disease. And the Turks, bless them, just called it the Christian disease. Everybody pointed at the neighbor. We now call it syphilis. And in those first decades, it was far crueler than the version that exists today. So that was the world. A world where one night could cost you your face, your mind, and eventually your life. There was no penicillin then, no clinic to walk into, barely even a doctor who understood what he was looking at. Now think about that for a second, because every man you are about to meet was trying to solve this with almost nothing. This seemed like a small inconvenience to most of them at the time. It was not. So what did a man actually do? Let me walk you through the toolkit, and I want you to remember the whole time that these were not stupid people. They were desperate people. There is a difference. The first idea was the obvious one, a barrier, something between you and the danger. So men used what they had, strips of oiled linen, pieces of cloth soaked in solutions of herbs and wine, and whatever a local woman swore by, tied on with a little ribbon. I will let you imagine how well a damp piece of fabric and a bow performed in the heat of the moment. So, not great. Then came the animal version, and this is where your grandfather has to take a breath. By the 1600s, men were using sheaths made from the intestines of sheep and goats. You would clean it, soak it until it went soft, sometimes scent it, because, well, you can imagine why. And there you had it, the cutting edge of personal safety in the age of kings. They were expensive, so expensive that a man would wash his out, hang it up to dry, and use it again. And again. I mean, sit with that for a moment. The thing standing between a soldier and a disease that could melt his nose off was a reused piece of sheep gut he kept in a little box. And if the barrier failed, which it very often did, then came the cures. And the cures, my friends, were sometimes worse than the disease. For 400 years, the great European answer to syphilis was mercury. Yes, that mercury. The silvery poison in old thermometers. They rubbed it into the skin. They sat men in heated boxes breathing its fumes. They fed it to them. It made the gums rot, the teeth fall out, the mouth run with saliva, and the mind go soft. There was a grim little saying that went around for generations. A night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury. You would think someone would have stood up and said this is insane. For the longest time, nobody did. And gonorrhea, the one in our title, the one the soldiers called the clap, had its own special menu of horrors. Because gonorrhea lives where you really do not want a doctor poking around, the treatment was to flush it out directly. Doctors used a syringe to push solutions of silver salts and harsh chemicals straight up the urethra. No anesthetic, just a glass syringe, a grim-faced physician, and a soldier gripping the edge of the table. Men described it as worse than any battlefield wound they had taken. And they lined up for it anyway, because the alternative was worse. This is where the story takes a turn that almost nobody expected, because somewhere in all that misery, people started actually paying attention. And the first real hero of our story is a man you have probably never heard of, with one of the great names in medical history, Gabriele Falloppio, an Italian anatomist working in Padua in the 1500s. If his name rings a faint bell, it is because the fallopian tubes are named after him. The man knew his way around the human body. Falloppio looked at this plague tearing through soldiers and did something radical for his time. He designed a thing on purpose, a sheath cut from linen, fitted to the man, soaked in a chemical solution before use, then tied on with a ribbon, and then he did something even more radical. He tested it. In a book published in 1564, just after he died, he claimed he had given his linen sheath to over 1,100 men, and that not a single one of them had caught the French disease. Now, we cannot exactly check his paperwork, but there it is, in writing, more than 450 years ago, the first real instructions for protecting yourself from a man trying to save soldiers from rotting alive. If the story had stopped right there, this would be a very different and much sadder history. But it did not stop there. The idea traveled, the way good ideas do, slowly and by word of mouth, and mostly in the worst parts of town. By the 1700s, the sheaths had a reputation, a black market, and a loyal customer base. And the most famous customer of them all was a charming Venetian rascal named Giacomo Casanova. You know Casanova as a lover. What you may not know is that he wrote about these things in his memoirs with the seriousness of a man inspecting a parachute. He called them English riding coats. He called them assurance caps. And here is the detail I love. Before he trusted one, he would blow it up like a little balloon to check it for holes. Think about the man, the greatest seducer in European legend, sitting there in candlelight, gravely inflating a piece of sheep gut to make sure it would not let him down. There is something deeply human in that. He wanted his pleasure, sure, but he also wanted to live. If you are enjoying sitting under this tree with me, do an old man a favor and hit that subscribe button. I tell one of these forgotten stories every week, the ones they leave out of the school books. Now, by the time the year 1914 came around, the whole world went to war at once, and every problem we have talked about exploded onto a scale no king of Naples could have imagined. Millions of young men pulled out of their towns and villages, shipped across oceans, packed into the trenches of France with nothing to do between the killing but think about home and everything they were missing. And the disease came with them, the way it always had. Both the clap and syphilis tore through the armies of the First World War. The numbers were staggering. Soldiers were being knocked out of the fight not by bullets but by infection, losing weeks of duty, filling up hospital beds that were needed for the wounded. Now here is where the different countries showed their true colors, and it is fascinating. The British Army, practical to the bone, started handing condoms to its men. So did others. But the American Army, under the command of General John Pershing, took a very different road. America, in that era, was deeply uncomfortable with the whole subject. The men in charge back home decided that giving a soldier a condom was the same as giving him permission, so they refused. Instead, the American soldier got two things. He got lectures, stern, moralizing lectures about staying pure for the girl back home. And he got the prophylaxis station. And this is the part where it stopped being funny, because the moral high ground turned into something out of a nightmare. Here is how it worked. If an American soldier had been with someone, he was ordered to report by the clock to a special treatment station as soon as possible afterward. There, he would face exactly the kind of treatment we talked about earlier. Chemical irrigation, a mercury-based ointment called calomel rubbed in, a burning silver solution. If he could prove he had reported within a few hours, he was treated and let go. If he could not, and he got sick anyway, he could be punished, docked pay, even court-martialed for the crime of getting infected. So the official American policy was, we will not protect you, but we will absolutely punish you. Cold comfort in a glass syringe. But here is the detail that most people miss when they look back at all this. While the armies were busy with lectures and burning chemicals, the actual cure was already being born in a laboratory. A German scientist named Paul Ehrlich had spent years with his team testing hundreds of arsenic compounds, looking for something that would kill the syphilis bug without killing the patient. In 1910, they found one. They called it Salvarsan, and the newspapers called it the magic bullet because it was the first time in human history a specific drug had been aimed at a specific disease and actually worked. It was harsh, it was difficult to use, but it was real. The age of just suffering and praying was finally starting to end. And then came the two inventions that changed everything for good. The first was rubber. Back in 1839, an American named Charles Goodyear had figured out how to treat rubber so it stayed strong and stretchy instead of melting in summer and cracking in winter. Within a couple of decades, that discovery gave the world its first rubber condoms. Now I want to be honest with you about these early ones, because we are spoiled today. They were thick, and they were reusable, which tells you everything you need to know about how thin they were not. Men washed them and kept them in a drawer. An improvement on sheep gut, certainly. A miracle by the standards of Naples, but still a long way from what you would recognize. The real leap came in the 1920s with a material called latex. Latex is rubber suspended in water, and it let manufacturers make condoms that were thin, cheap, and meant to be used once and thrown away. For the first time in all of human history, protection became something an ordinary man could afford, carry in his pocket, and never have to wash out afterward. That, right there, is the world you were born into. You just did not know how recently it arrived. And by the time the Second World War came around, the American Army had learned its lesson the hard way. This time, instead of lectures and punishment, they handed condoms out by the millions, made training films, plastered up posters, practically begged their soldiers to use them. The same country that would not say the word a generation earlier was now running a full campaign. And then, in the middle of that war, came the thing that finished the story. Penicillin, that ordinary green mold, turned into medicine, mass-produced just in time. A disease that had haunted soldiers since the siege of Naples, that had cost men their faces and their minds, and 4 centuries of mercury, could now be cured with a simple injection in a matter of days. 500 years of horror answered at last. So look at you. Look at what you have. You can walk into any shop, any pharmacy, any gas station at 2 in the morning, and for the price of a sandwich, hold in your hand a thing that is thinner and safer and more reliable than anything a king or a Casanova could have dreamed of. And if something does go wrong, a doctor can fix in a week what once took a lifetime of poison and prayer. You did not earn that. I did not earn it either. It was handed to us, paid for by every soldier who gripped the edge of a table, every man who blew up a piece of gut to check for holes, every desperate doctor who reached for mercury because he had nothing else. They did the suffering. We got the convenience. So the next time you hear someone say the past was simpler, that people back then were tougher, that we have all gone soft, you remember this story. Remember the army outside Naples in 1495. Remember the reused sheep gut and the saying about Venus and Mercury. Remember the soldier reporting to the prophylaxis station with his pay on the line. Those people were truly not soft. They were braver than we will ever have to be about things we will never have to face. And they were also, let us be honest, completely out of their minds by the standards of any sane person today. Both of those things are true at once. That is usually how history works. So yes, that is how that little thing in the drawer came to exist. That is the long, strange, painful road that got us here. And if you take one thing away from sitting under this tree with me today, let it be a quiet, almost embarrassing gratitude that you were born now and not then. Sleep well tonight, you lucky, lucky thing.